Hello everyone, welcome back to my channel. I am recording audio. Audio is rolling, so we're good to go. I am gonna read a joke before we begin. Why wasn't the geometry teacher at school? Because she sprained her ankle. Oh my God. That is rich, my friends. Hello everyone, welcome back to my channel. Thanks again so much for being here today. Today's video is really exciting because I'm posting this on the day my spring semester of graduate school starts again. So welcome to the spring semester if you've already started. That sucks. If you're starting today, that also sucks. But we're here to be optimistic and excited about the academic year ahead. I have 2 semesters left of grad school. I will link my grad school Q&A if you have any questions about my degree or what I plan to do with my degree, which has changed since that video. So I can do a follow-up if that's what you'd like. But today's video, I'm gonna go through some of my favorite books I've read for my degree, or degrees, because I've read some of these in undergrad and some of them in graduate school. So I'm gonna be going through some of my favorite classics that I've had to read for school. And then at the end, I have like 5 tips. I'm not gonna number them, I don't know. I have a bunch of tips on how to be successful in your English degree. I have some more practical tips about actually studying literature, and then I have other tips that's just about like how to communicate in classes and how to, I don't know, find success in any degree. Anyway, we're gonna get into it, my friends. I have quite the pile next to me. They're in no particular order. I'm just gonna talk through them and discuss why I liked them and what value they added to my degree. So we're gonna start here with the collected poems of William Butler Yeats. Here's the deal, my friends. As much as I'd like to be a poetry nut, because I think poetry is so aesthetically pleasing, and I think that people who love poetry are somehow inherently smarter than me. Like, I just feel like if you love and consume poetry on a regular basis, you are somehow elite. And I don't know how to explain that, but I'm sure you know what I'm talking about, right? So I personally don't love poetry. I don't read a lot of poetry, and especially in my early years of my English or literature journey, I was very intimidated by poetry. But in my Irish literature class, when I was an undergrad, we had to read a bunch of Irish poetry, and that is where William Butler Yeats comes up. And this is by far my favorite poet, one of the only poets I know, so it's not like he's fighting for the top spot. He's there because he's one of the few. But his poetry is so gorgeous, it's stunning, which is just a synonym of gorgeous, which is why I'm saying it. And I feel like he's kind of known as being kind of Irish political and also Irish mythical. He talks a lot about magic and fairies and whimsicalness, and it's just beautiful lyrically, but also he wrote a lot of like political poetry, a lot of things centered around Irish politics, because I think he was writing in the early 1900s and late 1800s, I believe. But in any case, the reason why I bring him up is because if you've ever wanted to really dive deep into some Irish literature, I highly recommend Yeats. If you've never really been into poetry, I still recommend Yeats. It is so beautiful and flowery, and I actually have, you know, I'm not showing you right now, maybe I'll insert a clip, but I have this thing on my wall, this print that says, "And pluck till time and times are done, the silver apples of the moon, the golden apples of the sun." And that's from my favorite Yeats poem, and I wrote one of my first English essays on that poem, and I got an A on it, and I was so excited. So if you've never read Yeats, I recommend it. And that's what I have to say on that. On to the next. All right, next up, this is gonna come as a shock to no one, especially if you've watched any of my like 2020 wrap-up reads or, you know, some of my favorite books. If you've ever seen me talk about favorite books, this is high on the list, and that is The Maltese Falcon. This is the just most beautiful edition you'll ever see of this book. I really don't think there's a better edition of The Maltese Falcon. It is by far one of my favorite books of all time. I think that it is such a wonderful pinnacle in detective literature. If you've been interested in detective literature, like classic hard-boiled detective reading, I believe that The Maltese Falcon is a great place to start. I know a lot of people also love The Big Sleep by Raymond Chandler. I personally hate that book. I think it sucks. So I would highly recommend The Maltese Falcon. It is so good. It is so rich. The detective character, who is Sam Spade, is one of the most intriguing detectives I've ever read. I know a lot of people love Sherlock Holmes, which I would also recommend. I did not pull him off the shelf, but I would also highly recommend you read some original Sherlock stories because they are historic for a reason. They are so good and so fun, and it makes sense why they've stood the test of time. Stood against the test of time. I don't know the expression, but there's a reason why they're still popular. Anyway, so Sherlock Holmes is a great detective that people study, but I think that Sam Spade is also a fantastic character to study and so interesting and so complex and so shitty in so many ways. He is not a good man, but he is a fun man to read. So, highly recommend The Maltese Falcon. I'm going to be reading The Thin Man, which is also by Dashiell Hammett, very soon. But I love it so much, and again, this copy is stunning, so what else do you want me to say? Speaking again of hard-boiled detectives or noir fiction, I had to read Double Indemnity for another class. I was taking this noir film and literature class, and I had to drop it last semester because, simply put, I was losing my mind. But before I dropped it, I read Double Indemnity, and first of all, it is maybe the shortest book you'll ever read. So it's really, really fast-paced just in and of itself, but it's also such a fun book. It is so fun. It is so twisty. Immediately you realize it's not going to be like a traditional detective story because the man you're reading is actually part of the crime, and you find that out right away, but I won't spoil what the crime is. You find out that he's a bad guy in the first chapter, and from there, it is quite the ride. It is so good. The movie is so good, and I just highly recommend if you want to read like a hard-boiled detective story, because he's not a detective, but if you want to read some noir fiction, Double Indemnity is amazing. Next up, now here's the deal. This next author is a complicated sort. A lot of people are intimidated by his work. A lot of people have tried another one of his books and find it very challenging to read. This is the only book I've read by this author, but I personally loved it, and that is A Portrait of the Artist as a Young Man by James Joyce. One of my super, super good friends from grad school actually wrote her entire thesis on Ulysses, and I was excited to read it because I knew how much she loved it, and then I picked it up and I was like, no, I'm not doing this. I hope to one day, but as of now, this is the only Joyce that I've read. What to say about it? This was the second paper that I wrote. I think it was the second paper that I wrote in upper division English classes before I was a graduate student, and I wrote it on hands in this book, specifically the main character's hands and how he felt pain and pleasure through his hands, and it was a phenomenal essay that I got an A on, and I'm super proud of it. That's why I bring it up, and I think maybe that's why I like this book so much, because I was really into the hand imagery and into just the ups and downs. This again was for my Irish literature class, and it was such a joy to experience Joyce. And I just thought it was fantastic. So I think this one is far easier to finish than Ulysses is, but that's all I know. I also have a collection of stories by him called The Dubliners, but I haven't read that one yet. So anyway, James Joyce. Next up, it wouldn't be a literature video unless Shakespeare was somewhere on this list, and I have to recommend Macbeth. Macbeth and Hamlet. I had never read any Shakespeare before my graduate degree, literally. Oh, that's not true. We had to read Romeo and Juliet in 8th grade, but I didn't. Trust me, I was not studying it for the language. I actually had a boyfriend in that class, and we had just broken up while we were reading it. So I was like, this is tragedy and this is heartache. So anyway, I hadn't academically researched or studied Shakespeare before my graduate degree, and Macbeth and Hamlet and Henry IV Part 1 and Twelfth Night were the 4 plays that we read. And once I finished Macbeth and once I finished Hamlet, I was like, oh God, I have been missing so many references in my life, because, I mean, we already all know Shakespeare's name, but there is so much cultural reference to him and language we use and sayings that we have that come from Shakespeare. And so I felt like I just had a better grip of the world and like language. But Macbeth has like 3 witch-like sisters and some ghosts and murder and betrayal. And I remember starting it being like, oh my God, I'm gonna be so bored. And then after Act 1, I was like, holy hell, I am hooked. So definitely recommend Macbeth if you've never read Shakespeare. But Hamlet, I feel like, is also a great place to start because, oh my God, there were so many literary memes I've read over the years that I just simply didn't understand until I actually read Hamlet. So there you go. Next up, we get to 3 books. I think these are actually my 3 final books that I will be recommending. And I read them all for a class called like 19th century socialist novel or something. These 3 books mean a lot to me. So be kind if you didn't like them, because I will protect them with my entire being. Anyway, the first one is Jude the Obscure by Thomas Hardy. God damn it, does this one hurt. God, it is sad from the beginning to the end, especially at the end, and especially like right around the end, there's a pretty tragic event. It's pretty graphic, it's pretty gruesome at certain points, and it's just so sad. So there's betrayal, there's some promiscuity, sexy behavior, I won't lie. I remember when I read it, I was like, that happens in novels like this? Like, I was like, this is a classic and I'm reading about someone's alabaster globes? I think not. Anyway, it is so good. If you've never read Hardy before, well, you know, don't do it if you're not feeling so great, because you won't feel better at the end of this reading experience, but it is quite the treasure. So recommend it. I recommend. Next up, this is probably the book that out of all of these books, I would recommend the least, although I love it very much. And that is George Eliot's Middlemarch. The reason why I recommend it the least is because it is quite the slog to get through. It is beautifully done. It is so fun to read. And it is just amazing. Like, all of the characters are so fun and there's so much gossip and so much drama. So it is really, really fun, but it is super long. This is probably the book that I learned the most from as a graduate student. So I'm only kind of warning you about it because it is so long. We've gotten to my last book, and this is by far my favorite book that I've read for my degree. I read this in graduate school. I read it in that class, the socialist novel class, and I think it was the first book we read. And it was such a, like, contrasting like how stressed out and scared I was in that class with how much I loved this book. It was such a beautiful way to enter a class that I was really nervous about, and that is Elizabeth Gaskell's North and South. I love this book. I wrote a paper. It was my first graduate level paper in my first graduate level class, where I wrote a paper and it was all about fruits. Fruit in this novel. Grapes and peaches and apples. I wrote a paper on fruit. And I got an A. And not only did I get an A, this is just a quick humble brag, although not humble at all. My professor asked, can I read a passage of your work out to the class? And let me tell you what that did for my imposter syndrome. Okay, for a second, I forgot I had it, because it was like, wait a second, what? It's my first graduate level paper, and it's about fruit, and you are trying to share it with other graduate students. I was floored and I felt wonderful and it was amazing. Anyway, I say that to just brag, but to also bring us full circle that this novel is fantastic. It is wonderful. It is beautiful. And again, there's a lot of fruit. You're following this woman named Margaret, and she's from the south of England, where it's like country, pasture, beautiful. I live like on some land and it's wonderful. And then her dad gets a job in the north of England, which is more of an industrial town, where she moves into a city where she has to live in an apartment, and there's, you know, she lives next to a cotton mill, so there's like smoke and ash and everything's covered in dust, and All the men in the town are really mean to her. So she has this new life. Look, you can see the pasture. I'm just noticing this now. It's the pasture of the South. And then the North has the city. And it's just wonderful. So if you've ever been like, I want to read a classic, but I want to read one that's like not Jane Austen or not Charles Dickens, I would highly recommend this book because it's so beautiful. And I should actually not put it back on my shelf because I just want to reread it at this point. I think it's wonderful and beautiful and I love it. So those are my recommendations. Those are my favorite books that I've read for my graduate degree. And now we will pivot, I'm sorry. We will pivot to some of my tips for how to be successful in college at large, but also specifically in your English degree. I feel like I had so many insecurities going into a literature degree, especially since I got my undergrad in another subject. Then when I was suddenly a graduate student, I felt so underprepared and so stupid and like I wasn't worthy. And so I have some tips on how to either not feel like that or to just feel better about your degree at large. Okay, let's first discuss imposter syndrome. It's a bitch, I'm not gonna lie. Imposter syndrome is so hard because you just feel it. And it's not like, it's like, I can tell you you're worthy, but until you actually start believing it, I can't make it go away for you. But here's what I'll say. When I joined my English program, I thought, I'm not worthy, I'm not smart enough, I must have tricked them, I don't know how I'm in here because I'm too stupid. But here's what you need to remind yourself, and here's what I reminded myself, and here's what I'm asking you to do, is that you just need to tell yourself that you are worth it, that you are smart enough, and that you deserve to be there. The students in your classes that you think are smarter than you had to start somewhere as well. Your professors were once a student just like you, where they were confused and they were learning. So you're not alone. You have to learn. You have to start at the bottom in order to gain this knowledge. You're not like on the first day of school, it's not like you're supposed to know everything. That's why you're in your program, is to learn the things that you don't know. And so I would just say, like, just tell yourself you're good enough. I do that before almost every class, whether it's on Zoom or in person. When I would walk into a classroom, I would have that kind of this moment off to the side where I was like, you're good enough. You're smart enough. You're here for a reason. You did not trick them. Everything's okay. You don't need to know everything. And so that's what I would say. Just repeat that to yourself like a mantra, and eventually you'll slowly start to feel better. The second one, and I've talked about this before, but making friends in your classes will also help with your imposter syndrome, because you will feel way more comfortable with speaking out and having opinions and feeling behind, because you'll have other people as camaraderie, or you'll have other comrades. I'm reading 1984, so maybe I'm just saying comrades to be annoying, but making friends was by far the best thing that I could have done in my degree. I know that we're in this really weird situation of being on Zoom for a lot of our learning. And I would actually say that Zoom might be easier to make friends with or make friends on, because when you're in person, I personally can't just like go up to someone and be like, hi, do you want to be my friend? I just can't do it. Whereas on Zoom is this special place where we all are pulling our hair out. We're all frustrated. We're all nervous. We're all stressed out. Like, there's a million things to feel about Zoom, and not a lot of them are positive. And so if you are feeling any type of way about your classes, or being behind, or feeling like you're not smart enough, you can easily DM people on Zoom. And usually people are very, very happy to have someone reach out to them on Zoom. I know that whenever I get one of those like personal messages in my classes where it's just to me, or a direct message on Zoom, I'm always like, oh my God, people want to like be my friend and talk to me. So I would say approach people with vulnerability and be honest and say, hey, I loved what you said earlier in class. I thought what you said was brilliant. I'm feeling really behind in this class, or I'm feeling really lonely, or just kind of nervous about this class. And is there any way that like maybe I could get your email and talk to you, or just maybe just start little friendships through Zoom. Congratulate people when they say the right thing. Tell people that they have a great point, or that they sounded super smart, or that their presentation was awesome. I got a few of those DMs this year, and I made sure to give them back to other people, where if someone did something really exceptional on Zoom, sending a little private message is is such a sweet way to connect. And then from there, you can make real friendships, and it's awesome. And once you make friendships in grad school, you'll realize that everyone feels this way. Everyone feels behind, and everyone feels stupid sometimes, and everyone gets assignments wrong, and everyone is vulnerable and scared to speak out sometimes. So once you make friends or once you make connections on Zoom, it can really transform your school experience. So I highly recommend. All right, the next piece of advice, there it is, that I have for everyone, is to communicate with your professors. Some people don't have a problem doing this. Some people have the mindset of like, well, I'm paying tuition and I'm taking this class, so I'm not going to feel bad about emailing my professor. And that's perfect, because that's how you should feel. I, however, feel like I'm a burden to everyone. I feel constantly that like, if I have a question about something, I'd much rather try to figure it out myself than reach out to a professor and annoy them. That's just how my brain works. I don't want to bug anyone. And what I've realized is that once you start communicating with your professor, number one, you feel more comfortable when you get into a class because your professor recognizes you. They know who you are. Let them know what your ideas are. And maybe if you don't participate as much in classes, if you're talking to your professor one-on-one, then they're like, oh, they are doing the reading, even if they're not talking as much in class. So that's awesome. But also, professors are not mind readers. They don't know what you're doing. They don't know your life. They don't know what you have going on. And so if, for example, I'm going to use myself as an example, my professors for the first 2 semesters of grad school didn't know that I was a full-time worker. They didn't know that I had a full-time job that I had to like be very engaged with. And it wasn't until this last semester when I finally reached out to my professors at the beginning of the semester and said, hey, I'm just letting you know I have a full-time job and sometimes my boss needs things for me in the middle of the day or at night, and I need to do them. And every single professor that I've communicated with this about has been so understanding and so kind to me. And so again, professors are not mind readers. They don't know what's going on with you. And they also have like 100 other students or more that they have to worry about. The last thing I have to say is do your reading. And this is a hard one because doing the reading sucks sometimes. Most of the time it sucks because you're not reading the book that you wanted to read for fun. You're getting assigned reading. But especially with literature and especially with studying theory and literary analysis and essays, you can't get away with not reading the stuff. I mean, you can get away with it, but you'll be lost, your grade will suffer, it'll be very obvious when you're in class and when you're writing your essays that you did not do the reading. And let me tell you this, as much as I struggle with reading literary theory, if you're not reading it, it will continue to come up every week. I'm not kidding. If your professor has assigned you some theory to read, it's because they know it so fucking well. They know it better than anything. Like they know the theory that they're assigning to you or the analysis or the essays so well. That's why they're assigning it to you. And if you don't read it, it will come bite you in the ass later in the semester. And unfortunately, I've had to learn the hard way. I've had many embarrassing kind of interactions with professors where they mention someone they assigned that I didn't read, and it's very obvious I didn't read them, and then it just makes the whole semester harder. So what I'll say, there's 2 different things I need to say about the reading. It sucks, but you gotta do it. The first thing I'll say is when it comes to theory or essays or analysis that is just really hard to grasp, read it all the way through once and then read it again. Read it the first time, read it fast. Just read everything on the pages, get it in your head and just be like, okay, and then go back through and read it again. And it'll totally stick way better the second time. Reading it twice and making it nice is how you'll succeed. The second thing I'll say about reading is use audiobooks for your academic reading, especially the novels. It's harder to find audiobooks around short stories or essays. It's easier when you're reading someone like Sherlock Holmes because almost every Sherlock story has an audiobook with it. So if you're reading like a really famous short story, you can probably find it. Audiobooks make this all so much more possible, and it's so much more easy to get through your academic reading when you're able to like go do a puzzle while you're listening to Bleak House by Charles Dickens, for example. Like maybe you hate that book and you didn't want to read it, but you had the audiobook, so you're able to get through it. You know what I mean? So I'm just pulling out an example. I'm not trying to be specific. But if you hated Bleak House and you never wanted to spend any time sitting down with it, it made it a lot easier if you had an audiobook with you. The apps that I use are Libby, Hoopla, Scribed, and I know that we don't love Amazon, but Audible has a lot of books included in Audible memberships. But trust me, if you haven't gotten on the audiobook train yet, do it for your degree because you'll save yourself a lot of time and a lot of stress. And especially when it's a book that you're not enjoying, when you have someone performing it or you have someone, doing some cool dialogue, it makes it a lot more fun of an experience, even if you're not liking the book. So those are my main tips. You are worth it, you're smart enough, and you deserve to be in the classes that you're in. I just think it is such a beautiful thing to study, and it's so much fun, but it is also really intimidating because a lot of people in the literature sphere kind of have this like pretentious I'm better than you attitude. That's what I've kind of come across before, and especially like in my YouTube comments, I get a lot of comments that are very much like a "you're so stupid" kind of thing because they think that they've had real literature and I'm just a dumbass who like is getting a master's degree in literature but also enjoys reading romance novels. Like it's just really shitty, but I think that it's such a fun thing to study and it has made me a better reader and it has made me understand literature better and just theory, and it's just, it's not always the most fun thing, but it is a very satisfying thing. So best of luck in your next semester. I hope you do well. I hope you have a wonderful semester, and I hope to see you in the next video. Bye!